Hello, everyone, and welcome to Brivia's July 2023 webinar on reviving trust. My name is Steve Smith. I'm Brivia's Vice President of Market Development, and we are so glad to have you here with us today to discuss this vitally important topic. At Brivia, we make work better, and we do this by offering training, coaching, and solutions designed to help an organization improve their leadership, culture, and engagement. We also offer a lot of free advice and help to help you become a better leader. And we do that by our monthly webinars, by monthly newsletters, and frequent posts on LinkedIn, as well as a YouTube channel with all of our videos from the past on there as well. For this webinar today, we are also streaming live on LinkedIn Live for the first time. So I just want to welcome anyone joining us there. I want to let you know that if you have any comments or questions, you can leave them in the live there, and we will get back to you as soon as we conclude this webinar here on Zoom today. We've also changed the format for the summer. So rather than a 45-minute presentation, Stephen and I are going to have a 30-minute discussion on reviving trust. But we've kept some things the same for webinars as well. We're also going to have a handout for you in the recording that we're going to send through tomorrow, as well as we're going to encourage you to continue to participate with us. So please do that through the chat and through Q&A. And in fact, I'm going to give you a chance to do that right now. Why don't you jump in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. I am joining us from my lovely hometown of Airdrie, Alberta. And while you guys are doing that in the chat, I'm just going to invite Steve into the conversation. And Steve, where are you joining us from today?
Hey, Steve. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba today. So I'm in one of my homes away from my other home. So glad to be here. I see that the chat is lighting up. People from Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, all over the place, across the country. Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you bet. So, Steve, today we're going to have a conversation on the 5 steps to reviving trust. But before we kind of get into the conversation, why don't you lay some groundwork here for us and why this is such an important topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. And thanks, everybody, for joining us on a day that you could probably be doing something else. So, people from Minnesota as well, and Melfort, Saskatchewan. I love it. So many people have joined us today, and it's so exciting. We're excited to be here. And one of the things that we're talking about, something that we hold dearly at Brivia, it's so important that we optimize human potential and eliminate unnecessary suffering. And around the apology is a big thing, right? We're going to talk about 5 steps to repairing and reviving trust when it's been damaged. And I think one of the things we want to just get right out of the way is, Brivia, we like to simplify things to make them practical and actionable. And the first thing is, trust is so very important. And what is it? Well, we have kind of boiled it down to, it's basically a sense of security. Right, that sense of safety from either actions or inactions, either doing something, saying something, or not doing something that are actually favorable to the relationship, right? So that's what trust is that sense of safety and that security. And why is it important? My goodness, if you haven't figured this out already as a human being, that when we're experiencing trust in our relationships at work, on our teams, in our environments, we are doing our best and we're actually feeling much better. And trust optimizes individual and collective functioning. It improves performance, it improves resilience, and overall, it's just better for our well-being. So it's kind of important. Back over to you, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. Well, we're going to get into this and start unpacking these 5 steps here. Just wanted to remind you, let us know if you have any questions or thoughts in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well as throughout our conversation here today. So, Steve, we talked about 5 steps. The step 1 is to acknowledge. Can you start us there and talk a little bit about that, or do we want to back up and talk about the apology first?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So no, for sure. I'm so just like you, Steve. I'm excited. I want to get into the steps, right? And I like what you're saying. We want people to ask questions, make comments in the chat. This is that stuff that's so important. We want to hear people's experiences. If something makes sense, oh great, awesome, I agree. If it don't, put the questions in there. Either Q&A, we'll pick them up, or put them right into the chat. Let's get into it. What is an apology, right? Well, first and foremost, it's supposed to make things better. It is a mechanism for relationship repair. And that's exactly what it is. It is a way of repairing relationships when they've been ruptured, I often talk about bent, broken, bruised, right? Burnt a little bit. Also, it's important to lay this the foundation that because it's a mechanism for repair, that must be our intention. Our intention must be to repair the relationship for the sake of building trust or repairing trust or reviving trust. It must be intentional. If it's about getting people to work harder or getting people to work more efficiently, or some other intention or spirit is pushing the apology, there's a really good chance that it won't work out well. And finally, when we get a question often, when is it warranted? When does trust when does an apology need to be required? And we basically say whenever the relationship, a work relationship, a relationship in life, has been bruised or bent or broken or burnt in some way. So whenever we know for sure that trust has been compromised, and that relationship is important to us, it is important to use an apology.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I did jump the gun there, Steve, but it kind of reminds, as I'm looking at this, I don't know how many times us as parents have said, I want you to apologize and I want you to mean it. And then I'm looking at these 3 steps and thinking, oh my gosh, those are wrong in so many different ways. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with us, right? I mean, this is so critical because we've all been taught in different ways, and often it's become a word, right? And you often see that. Tell them they're sorry, they say the word, and it's over. And what we're going to get to today is the 5 steps that are absolutely critical, and when followed in the way that we kind of lay out, gives us a better chance at strengthening and sustaining the trust in the relationship.
All right, so are we ready for step 1, Steve?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, let's talk about acknowledge. Why don't you walk us through the first step here?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Steve said, throw your questions in the chat. Acknowledge is just exactly that. When we have learned that a relationship has been negatively affected by something that we've done or said, acknowledging is the first step. And acknowledgement just is simply acknowledging that it happened, right? Not jumping to the apology, but acknowledging it. Now, it's important to know to acknowledge what we know has happened. Sometimes people jump in to apologize for things that they don't even understand yet. They don't even know it's happened for sure, and we jump right into it and make the situation a little bit more confusing. Acknowledging the situation is to say, once they share it with you, you can say, what I'm hearing is that when I said that in that way at the meeting, it had that impact on you. Just acknowledge the behavior, acknowledge the impact, and that's it.
Steve, it's a really important step here. What are some ways that you could take this too far, or maybe not do this in a way that's going to actually repair that trust?
Well, I think, Steve, one of the biggest things that we do, right, when we hear somebody state that we've bumped or bent, and often most trust breaches in relationships at work and in life are accidental. Sometimes they're unknown. And because we care so much, we jump right in when somebody's trying to explain what they did, right? We either defend it, say, I didn't mean to do that. I swear, or we dismiss it and say, that's not what I was meaning to do. And we basically just ruin the acknowledgement, which kind of gets us off track and may impede the whole process, right? And what's the trust paradox that we talk about, right? We've often mentioned it at Brivia, is that the paradox is that to say that you've been hurt is to take the risk that you are going to get hurt again, which is why following the 5 steps is absolutely essential to the extent possible. Great question, Steve.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so acknowledge is the first step, and the second step is affirm. Why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah. So once we've heard, we've known, and someone has come to us. Once we acknowledge that we've done something, we have a responsibility to acknowledge it. And now the next step is, once we hear it, once we hear that we have said or done something that has impacted somebody's trust of us or the relationship, we must affirm. And affirm is a lot like validating, right? We're affirming it. Now, this is really important. I hear you, right? I hear that this has happened to you. I hear that you're upset. I hear that it made you feel this way. I hear that it had this impact on you. Affirming is really legitimizing and validating it. Unfortunately, sometimes we jump in with our experience and we delegitimize it, right? This is a zone of no judgment. Now, some people might be thinking online right now, and you can put it in the chat. I see there's something in there already. Is what happens sometimes is that we jump in and we judge, and some people actually, unfortunately, they think that affirming is agreeing. Now, this is really, really important distinction. I can affirm someone's experience. I don't have to agree with it. right? Because that's one of the most common things is, "Oh, I don't agree that I did that. I don't agree that they had that." There's no judgment here, and it's not up to whether we agree or not. It's just, I want to affirm and validate that you had this experience. I hear you, and it's important to you. Okay.
Yeah, Steve, I totally agree with that. And if you're trying to affirm, you don't necessarily have to agree, because if you did agree or think that by acknowledging you agree, another argument could break out and a chance for more
Yeah.
bruised trust could happen there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And affirming is really validating their experience as it's their truth, it's their experience, the impact for them was real. And I think it's really important that people that are here, that we, once we've acknowledged, affirming is that next step to say, hey, your experience is valid, right?
Mhm, mhm. So first step is acknowledge, the second step is affirm, and the third step is probably where most people start when it comes to repairing trust. Why don't we get into the third step?
Yeah, absolutely. The apology piece is right at the center, right? And it's so important that sometimes we want to rush to the I'm sorry, right? I do it all the like I want to do it. We lead with our hearts, and again, unintentionally, we could breach trust by accident, right? And it can come across as disrespectful when we try to talk over somebody or try to explain what we were trying to do in that moment, or when we did or didn't say anything. So the apology piece, apologizing, is this is the part. I am sorry that my behavior, and as specific as possible, that thing that I said, the words that I used, right, had that impact on you. And I'm sorry that I did that. And I'm sorry that you had that experience. Right. And that's you know, Elton John says sorry seems to be the hardest word. I think in this moment it might be, right, when it comes in genuinely, because we want to fill it with something else. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry, but, right. And one of the things I want to be really, really clear about, and we've been there, right? We've had the experience where somebody's apologizing and we can feel, here comes their justification, here comes the but, here comes the hammer. And that can be really scary, right? But when we get through it and someone is able to say to us, and we're able to say to them, I'm truly sorry from the bottom of my heart that you had that experience. And full stop. Full stop, no more. I'm going to
Yeah.
stop there, Steve. Any questions?
No, that's
Also,
really, really good. Yeah. And I think you're gonna do this. Just remind folks, ask questions in the chat. Let us know what you're thinking about this, about these first three steps so far. Steve, I like what you're saying about being very, very specific here. And then you had a key there too at the end. Just stop. Right? Like,
yeah,
don't get into explain mode, don't go into justification mode, don't try and shift the blame back to them. Just
yeah.
stop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just stopping and giving some, like, allowing for some silence, because again, whether you've been on the receiving end, right? Been on the receiving end, and there's some great stuff in the chat, right? So important.
Yeah,
Michael
yeah.
says, never say I'm sorry that you that you feel that way. Yeah, another dangerous judgmental situation, right? And that's great. We'd love to hear from people in the chat. What has your experience been, and how do you feel about these steps? And we're in the third one. And Steve, I think it's important to one of the reasons why we grounded ourselves, because I know that sometimes when I want to defend, sometimes I want to express myself, I have to go back to, what am I doing here, right? Is this about me, or is it about them, right? And the apology, because it's about repairing the trust with another person, it really is about them, right? It really has to be about them. That's why
Mhm.
acknowledging the behavior, affirming and validating, and then moving into the apology is critical. Because if we don't connect with the intention of this and the spirit of this, we are susceptible to going off track, and we're susceptible to damaging trust even further, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Steve, a question before we get on to the fourth step here. A question came in. The line between acknowledge and affirm seems blurry to me. Can you provide
Yeah.
some examples on how they're different?
Yes. The acknowledgement is more about our behavior, right? So acknowledgement is more about and it's a great question, by the way. So thank you very much. Keep the questions and comments coming. Acknowledgement is about our behavior. I'm going to acknowledge that the behavior happened. the look on my face, the tone of my voice, the way that I moved, what I did or didn't do. The acknowledgement is about acknowledging the situation. Affirmation and affirming goes more into the experience and validating and legitimizing the experience that they had. Just by acknowledging the situation, you're not validating their experience, and that's the big thing, right? So let us know if that's helpful. It's a great question. So if we go to a specific example, right? So Heather, great question. If I'm yelling at one of our team members, Chris, right? And it shuts him down and he doesn't feel good about it. And someone comes back to me and says, hey, we know that this had happened, and I hear in an email or that I need to acknowledge the behavior and apologize as warranted because I value the relationship. The acknowledgement is when I raised my voice and shut you down, right? That happened. And it sounds to me like you did not have a good experience, okay? I can't affirm anything. I cannot affirm anything until I hear from the person's experience. So when Chris shares, when you did that, it scared me. Or when you did that, I felt like that I didn't matter, or I felt that you were overpowering me. Now it's important for me to validate that and say, wow, it sounds like I made you feel small. It sounds like you felt like you didn't matter. And something, wow, it sounded like you were really scared. So acknowledgement is about the situation, and the affirmation moves more into the experience, okay? I hope that was helpful, Heather. Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, Michael actually just put something in the chat that I think sums it up well. Acknowledgement, just scroll down there. Acknowledgement expresses that you understand that the event happened. Affirmation expresses that you understand that it had an impact on someone else.
Yeah.
Sums it up well. So, okay.
Absolutely.
So first step
Awesome.
was acknowledge. The second step is affirm. The third step is apologize. Let's get on to the fourth step, Steve. What is it?
All right. Okay. And I want to be clear, even though we've systematized this apology, right? And we've laid it out with everybody knows I love my alliterations, right? So AAA, 5 A's, it's not easy, right? It's one of those simple things on paper. But again, when it comes to trust and values and a lot of the other stuff that we've talked about at Brivia, it does take practice, and it does take some time to get right? And I think that's really important to acknowledge. So the next piece, which is often left out of many apology approaches, which is we assume, right? Once I know what Heather's experience was or Michael's experience was, I assume what I need to do differently, right? Okay, I won't do that, or I assume based on my experience. What's really important here, and this is the fourth step, which is ask. Ask not only more about their experience, but most importantly, ask what I could do or could have done differently in that moment. Is there something that I could have done differently, right? And you're going to get something like, yeah, don't stand up over me, right? Like, do not stand up. I would appreciate that. So asking what you could have done differently in the situation is critical, but there's also two parts. Ask, if this situation happens again, what could I do differently, right? So the next time I disagree, or the next time I feel that you're raising your voice, what can I do differently to be able to navigate this situation again so that we can avoid this rupture in our relationship? So I'm going to pass it back to you, Steve. Any questions or any questions or comments from the folks?
Well, Steve, I love this one because it doesn't assume anything, right? You're really just trying to get it from there. And then I like what you mentioned there at the end too, is if this happens again, how can we better deal with this? So so we can repair that trust and build on it.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people, again, this is hard because we're human, right? We're in the feeling stuff here. Some of us are afraid to ask because we're afraid that we can't do what they're going to ask us. And we've got a great tool for that. And I'm going to share it right now. You can put it in your back pocket, right? Somebody might say, yeah, Steve, don't ever open your mouth in a meeting again, right? If you know Steve Group, that's impossible, right? So instead of saying, I can't do that, we have a question. It's called the $1 million question. And we share it in our trainings. How would that be helpful if I didn't speak in the meeting again? What difference would that make if I was to be silent through the meeting? And here comes the meaning behind the request. Well, I just want to have some space. Okay, let's talk about making space for you. because really it's impossible for me not to talk if I'm sharing the meeting, right? So what is the meaning behind the request? That's the first one. And the second one is be prepared, as much detail as possible. You may not be able to do everything. They might give you a list of like, don't stand up, don't say this, don't use this word. And we're getting closer to better each time. And we can say, okay, I'm going to try a couple of these things. I need to think about this one, but this is how we get closer to better, is by asking people, what could we have done differently? And what might we do differently if this situation comes up again? Okay.
Mhm. Oh, that's good. That's great. Folks, continue to, if you have any other questions, put them in Q&A or chat here. But we got affirm, acknowledge, apologize, and ask.
Yeah.
And now let's get into the fifth step here, Steve. What do we got?
All right. It's the fifth and final step in the 5-step process for mending damaged relationships. It is act. Right? It's so critical. Acting means don't act and pretend, right? But acting means act on what you've heard, integrate what you've heard, take action on what you've heard in terms of the behavioral indicators or the things that you could do differently, even just a little bit, right? Many of us, because I think the acting, as my good friend, Dr. Kate Stone from Novalia, it's one of my favorite quotes ever, is action is the consummation of apology, right? And we can apologize all day long, but if we don't take action on it, it really kind of sends an indirect or direct message that you really don't matter, right? That you really, that your best interests are not important to me, right? So the action is very, very, very critical, because we can talk all day long, but it's our actions. Remember, go back to the definition, our simple definition of trust. Trust is a sense of safety or security that is the result of actions or inactions that are favorable to us. So if we don't take any action after hearing a request for behavior change, or even try, there's a really good chance that we will make this situation worse. So acting on what we heard and trying to integrate it into those instances is absolutely critical part of apology. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Steve. And I think about one of the first slides you had is how the apology must be sincere, right?
Yeah.
To me, like, if you go through all those steps and then you fail to act, there's nothing that could come across as more insincere than that.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you got very specific advice and reasons and ways, you had a conversation about how you're going to approach things differently the next time, and you just don't do it. I can see how this would make it a lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And it's so, thank you, Steve. And it's so important that when we're doing this, if this is new to us or one step is new, that we cut ourselves some slack, right? That this is an important skill that takes some time, some muscle memory to build. And it's important to let people know what your intentions are, and reminding yourself of your intentions. And I have to be really honest. There's been times that we have gone to apologize and we weren't ready. The intention was not to repair the relationship. The intention was to get our point across. The intention was to cover it up. The intention was to move on. And I want to be really, really clear here, from one human to a whole bunch of others that have come to join us today, which is connect with your heart, get grounded in the intention of an apology and your intention to repair the relationship, and you're going to be on a better footing, right? To be able to follow these 5 steps, okay?
Yeah, that's great. Steve, a question came in the chat from someone that missed it at the beginning, but can you repeat your definition of trust?
Yes, and thank you for asking. And so again, it's just one of many, and I used it in the book Responsive Leadership, which is the full definition is: trust is a sense of security or safety that is the result of actions or inactions that are favorable to us, or at least not detrimental. So simply put, it's when we behave in a way that's favorable for the people that are in our lives or our work, and it will build trust, right? If we behave in a way that isn't favorable to somebody, it will detract or jeopardize or limit the trust in the relationship. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Stacy.
Steve, another question came in the Q&A queue here, just about your experience, right? Like, people know you have a vast experience of working with individuals, with children, with parents, with lots of different organizations. Do you have a couple of examples you want to highlight where you worked with an organization and they learned how to do this correctly, and maybe what it did for that organization moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. We were, one of the things that we often do is we help leaders with the human stuff, right? And apology is right in the small tissue fiber of the human stuff, right? It's where all the good stuff lives. It's where the scars live. But equipping leaders, one of the things we do is just, this approach, right? Is to understand it from our experience and to know that, we're not perfect. I thought you were going to ask me if I've ever screwed up, Steve, because I'm willing to say all the time, right? All the time, right? And that's why we're constantly pursuing getting to better, right? So one of the things that we do with leaders, and by the way, next webinar is on the barriers and the myths to building trust, which actually, if we're not aware of, will land us into this situation where we need an apology. So one of the things that we like to do is to help leaders develop the skills to be able to move through this process, right? And one of the biggest things from Dr. Jean Clinton that we use is lend them your calm, right? Some of the hospitals that we work at, we've got a couple of hospitals where they walk around saying, can you lend me your calm, or can I, I've got an apology, to make, right? And I've got a situation that I've got a performance issue that we've got to talk about. Can I borrow some calm before I go into this? Right. And we go through the steps, right? And the reason why I like the 5 steps, Steve, and everyone here, is it gives us a bit of a foothold, right? It gives us a bit that when the emotions are flying, right? If you know about the brain, the amygdala is in the driver's seat, right? And freaking out. And if we get back to the steps, it brings us to the front of our brain to be safe to kind of move through these steps in a way that's systematic. And we like to teach leaders how to do that.
Well, that's great. Steve, a question came in the chat. I know you're going to want to take this one. So this works great when it's a one-way simple apology. However, what if there's 2 folks, right? What if one party is willing and able to do this and the other one is not acknowledging their actions and they don't know how they contributed to it? She also put in here, like, we also deal with parties that have quote unquote history. So how would you coach someone in that situation?
Woo, that is a tough one, right? But it doesn't have to be as tough as it is. So great question. So you gotta focus on one at a time, right? You both can't take at the same time. So it's usually we encourage people with the most power, or who have, if there's 2 people involved, like, if you've got a parent and a child, or a leader and an employee, and both are responsible for the interaction, we often start with the person that has the most power, or the person that's most influential, to take the first step, right? Sometimes people say, no, I need that person to come forward. Now, there's a couple of things here. Let's untangle this a little bit, right? The first part is everyone has a responsibility to some degree in a relationship when we're working together, right? If we go into an apology thinking that we need to have something back, we're stepping outside of the spirit and intent of the apology. And I've got some good news for you, right? I learned this the hard way through mediating some of the most difficult cases with gang members, highly influential people. What I learned is that when I start, and I follow this process, there's a part of me going, I really wish they apologized. I really hope that they apologize for what they said. But when I silence that voice and I acknowledge what I did to hurt them, when I affirm their experience, that in between the affirmation and my apology, or shortly after my apology, it's not uncommon for people to own what they did as well. And that was something, I'll tell you why it took me so long to learn that. And it's a great question, because my fear that I wouldn't get apologized to, my fear that it was going to happen again, undermined my ability to follow this process. And it wasn't until I did it with 2 other people by accident that the person that we thought wasn't going to apologized halfway through the person's apology, right? And it was amazing, right? And that's why the steps are helpful. So when it's multiple people, be sure that you start with the right person. Be sure that you get grounded in the intent of the apology. Make it about them. If you get through the apology and there is a need, then you set up another time to see if they're willing to hear what the impact their behavior had on you. Do not try to do them both at the same time. It will just muddy the situation. Okay. Mm-hmm. I hope that was helpful. Yeah, no, this is great stuff, right?
Yeah, that's great. There's a couple more comments here, Steve, that I'll walk us through as maybe you get onto the tips for people here as we wrap up. But Ronan said sometimes you have to wait I got one after 2 years unexpectedly. And Jennifer is lead with your own behavior and intend to repair. And that is
Yeah.
so well said, Jennifer.
Yeah, and create conditions where people are safe to approach us. I'll tell you something. I want to be back to Ronan's and just as humans, I want to be really clear about this. And we're going to talk about this more in our next webinar. So hopefully you're there in August. But I would say 85% of the time that somebody has been offended or disrespected, or they feel like trust has been broken, the person that did it doesn't even know. Right now, that sounds astounding, right? Now, there's other times, but they don't really know. And the cool thing about this approach, and we've got all 5 steps there, and Steve, you're going to be sending a handout, but it's important to move through the steps in a systematic way, right? And if we jump the gun and we jump to affirm before we acknowledge, it can fragment the experience, and we go straight to the word and not to the other two, or we try to change a behavior that's not important to them, right? So do what you can to the extent possible. My favorite 4 words together to try to follow this process. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And be sure that if you get to number 5, follow through. Okay, follow up.
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, we had you here for a half hour today. We got some more questions coming in, so we're going to stick in and answer these questions. But if you have to jump, that's fine as well. But Steve, another question came in. How do you go about when your behavior toward one person impacted the whole family of that individual? Do you talk to each person directly, or do it in writing, or how would you approach that situation?
Absolutely. I think one of the things is, where there's, and I think it's Dan Siegel that says this, and Dr. Jean Clinton, where there's rupture, there must be repair. Now, while that's true, we have to go at people's pace, right? And if I want to apologize to Muhammad and Muhammad's not ready for it, Muhammad says, I don't want to talk to you just yet. That's when we have to step away and say, okay, let me know when you're ready. Right? Because I think if you've offended a whole family, now you're working with different experiences, right? It's important that the individual in the family understand that you are willing to apologize and that you want to apologize. The next step is up to them, right? That's different than a work situation because there's often, less structure around those and less kind of expectations and roles and responsibilities. But that's what I would suggest for starting. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, folks, if you have any more questions, we can get a couple more in if you needed to. And Steve, if you want to move on to the next page there.
Yeah.
Just
sure.
We've had a couple QR codes here throughout as well. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You could subscribe for a newsletter. We will also be sending out the recording from today's webinar with a handout for you. And so that'll be sent out tomorrow morning. We want to keep the conversation going. So if you want to continue to talk about this topic, you can reach out anytime to us, Steve or I on LinkedIn, or Brivia on LinkedIn, contact@briviaconsulting.com. We are going to have kind of take this part 2 for the month of August, and we're going to talk about the truth about trust, 5 ways to build it fast and make it last. And that's a conversation I'm looking forward to have with you here in the month of August. So Steve, any final words for our friends here?
I just want to say, go slow. Relationships are important, and take your time. Stay in touch. We love to help people with this. Also, you'll see on the slide here, the Getting to Better newsletter. We have tons more content coming your way. Lots more things to give away, and also I've got a book coming out, and we're going to start updating people on our newsletter for the Getting to Better book on how to elevate human potential at work and in life. So I just want to say thank you, Steve. Thank you to everybody that joined us. It was a nice big group today. And I just want to wish everybody the best as they go closer to get to better with the relationships that are the most important to them. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Thanks, Steve. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your summer. We will connect with you 4 weeks from today on 5 ways to build the truth about trust, 5 ways to build it fast and make it last. Thanks again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.